Hey guys, welcome back to the BSHS Bio-Besties TED Ed video, episode 2. I'm your host, Coach Dunn, along with Miss Bryant and Miss Keelen.
On today's episode, we'll take a closer look at ecology, which is the study of living things and how they interact with each other.
We advise you to take notes on notebook paper and be sure to write down the code words and the timestamps of the code word.
So let's dive right in.
Ecology is the study of how living things interact with each other and their environment. First, let's remember again the levels of organization. Every living thing is made of cells.
So what's in an ecosystem? An ecosystem is made up of all the living, biotic, and non-living, abiotic factors. I'll quickly circle things that are living, like the tree, the deer, the fish, and place an X over the things that are non-living, like the rocks, the clouds, the air, and the sun.
So let's review the levels of organization. We covered this previously, and we do understand that all life is composed of cells.
Cells are the basic component of living things.
Wait, Coach Dunn, didn't you have a crazy way of helping us remember the levels?
Cells, tissue, organ, system, organism.
What?
Cells, tissue, organ, system, organism.
So yes, cells make up tissue, tissues make up organs, organs make up organ systems, and organ systems, there are 11 by the way, make up an organism. And don't forget, each level must build upon the previous level.
So in our frog, for example, if you draw a cardiac muscle cell, then you must draw a cardiac muscle tissue. And then next you would draw a heart for the organ, and you would end the cardiovascular organ system.
Now that we have reviewed the levels of organization, let's add in the ecological organization. An organism is a single living thing that obtains food, water, and shelter to live, grow, and reproduce in its habitat or environment. An organism's niche is its total way of life. Example, the frog you see here is an organism. Organisms make up
Population. A population is a group of interbreeding organisms or species living in the same area. For example, the frogs living in a pond behind your neighborhood. Populations make up
communities. A community is all of the population in an ecosystem. For example, all the frogs, insects, reptiles, birds, plants, mushrooms, bacteria, protists, mammals, and fish living in the pond behind your neighborhood. Communities make up
an ecosystem or biome. An ecosystem includes all of the living, the biotic, and non-living, or abiotic features of an environment. There are several major types of ecosystems, such as a rainforest, the desert, tundra, deciduous forests, marines, taigas. Wait, like the rapper taiga? No. Like the taigas that Carol Baskin fed her husbands to? No.
Carol Baskin.
Example, all the frogs, insects, birds, taigas, reptiles, plants, mushrooms, bacteria, mammals, and fish, along with the water, the soil, the air, the clouds, sunlight, and man-made materials in the pond behind your neighborhood. Ecosystems make up
a biosphere. The biosphere is every place on Earth that can support life.
So before we move on, let's review what we just learned. Organisms make up populations, populations make up communities, communities make up an ecosystem, and ecosystems make up the biosphere.
Wait, Coach Dunn, do you have an easy way for us to remember this one?
Actually, I sure don't. There are two types of organisms, those that can make their own food and those that get their food from other sources. First, we have producers or autotrophs.
Wait, that's code word number 1.
Be sure to write down the code word and the timestamp. And as a reminder, just keep taking notes throughout this video.
So producers, or autotrophs, get their energy from the sun through the process of photosynthesis. Ultimately, all energy in our universe comes from the sun.
The second type of organisms are consumers, aka heterotrophs. Consumers or heterotrophs get their food from other sources. Don't forget that that includes us. We are heterotrophs because we have to consume our own food. There are three main types of consumers or heterotrophs. One is herbivores who only eat plants.
Carnivores who only eat meat.
And omnivores, they eat both plants and animals.
Scavengers eat the leftovers.
Decomposers break down decaying material. Remember, decomposers help return nutrients back to the environment, and they recycle chemicals such as carbon and nitrogen.
So do you know how these organisms get their energy? Well, producers, aka plants, some bacteria such as cyanobacteria, and algae is that green slimy junk, but actually belongs to the kingdom Protista. They receive their energy from the sun, from a process called photosynthesis. Consumers and heterotrophs, like us, receive their energy by consuming other organisms and absorbing their energy. But more about that later.
Hey, do you know who else is a heterotroph?
Your mom.
Your mom?
This is a picture of a food chain. But before we look at that, let's review what we learned. The strawberry plant in this food chain is a producer. The grasshopper is an herbivore. The mouse is an omnivore. The snake is a carnivore. And the hawk is also a carnivore, but we really call him the top dog. More about that later. And the mushrooms at the bottom serve as decomposers. So what do you think the direction of the arrow actually means?
The arrow in a food chain shows how energy moves in the direction of the arrow, from the organism being eaten to the one that is eating it. So in this example, the strawberry plant passes its energy to the grasshopper passes its energy to the mouse transfers its energy to the snake, and the snake transfers its energy to the hawk. But ultimately, all of that energy started with the sun, when the sun passed its energy to the producer or the strawberry plant.
So just remember that the arrow indicates the movement and transfer of energy. A food chain is a series of events in which one organism eats another and obtains energy. This begins with light energy from the sun. Each level is called a trophic level.
So let's look at this again. This is a food chain because it shows how one organism eats another, and each level is called a trophic level. So the strawberry is the first trophic level, the grasshopper is the second trophic level, etc. Food chains are linear and show movement or energy transfer in one direction. So if you remember, last week you learned about photosynthesis. Producers make food or glucose using the sun's energy through the process of photosynthesis.
Remember, photo means light and synthesis means to make.
So what plants do is they take in carbon dioxide and water, and they use the sun's energy to turn it into oxygen, which exits through the plant's stomata, and glucose, which is stored.
Remember, we play a critical part in this as well, as we give the plants carbon dioxide when we exhale or breathe out. Primary consumers eat producers or plants, and these can be omnivores or herbivores.
Secondary consumers are carnivores or omnivores, and they eat the primary consumer. So in other words, if you eat primary consumers, you are considered a secondary consumer.
Tertiary consumers eat primary or secondary consumers. These consumers are considered the top of the food chain, which means you are not eaten by anyone.
So what are some organisms that feed on everything? Scavengers are carnivores that feed on dead organisms. Decomposers break down decaying material and release nutrients into the soil.
Organisms use the energy released in the food chain to power all of their daily activities through the process of cellular respiration. We want you to remember that cellular respiration is photosynthesis backwards. Your mitochondria use oxygen and glucose to make water, carbon dioxide, and an energy molecule called ATP. Your body will store ATP and needed water, but expel carbon dioxide and extra water. So what this means is that when you eat food, your body will break down the food into glucose and the other biomolecules. The glucose from that food is what is used in cellular respiration to make energy.
Now, this is a diagram of 3 food chains. They all ultimately get their energy from the sun. And let's see what we learned about what these organisms represent. The tree stump, the purple flower, and the blueberry plant are all producers. These producers all get their energy from the sun. The slug, the snail, and the rat all eat producers, so they are considered primary consumers. The frog and the redbird eat primary consumers, so they are considered secondary consumers. The weasel is also a secondary consumer, but he is a top consumer because no one else eats him in this food chain. The snake and the hawk are tertiary consumers.
Now, we learned that a food chain is linear. Now, let's take a look at food webs. Food webs are many overlapping food chains in an ecosystem. Food webs show all organisms interact within an ecosystem, aka they show multiple interactions.
Now let's discover energy pyramids. The sun is the ultimate source of energy for all living organisms. The sun provides energy directly to producers and indirectly to herbivores, omnivores, and carnivores. It takes a large number of producers to provide enough energy to a small number of primary consumers. It takes a large number of primary consumers to provide enough energy to a small number of secondary consumers. It takes a large number of secondary consumers to provide enough energy to a small number of tertiary consumers. So, generally speaking, as you go up the trophic levels, the number of organisms decrease because you are getting further away from the original source of energy, or the sun.
Time for some energy transfer. We are going to calculate the amount of energy that is transferred from the ultimate source of all energy to the third consumer. We will start with the sun. The sun provides the energy for producers to conduct photosynthesis and make food.
And that brings us to our second code word. Code word number 2, the sun. Be sure to mark it down and your timestamp.
So the energy in from the sun is 1,000 units.
Now, let's use the tomato plant as an example of a producer. Tomato plant gets the 1,000 units in. It uses 900 of those 1,000 units to power its daily activities. Much of that energy is lost to the environment as heat or other cellular activities. Hey, Bio-Besties, how much of that energy is stored?
100. 100 units is stored and is now available for the primary consumer. The tomato hornworm loves tomatoes. When it eats the tomato, it only receives the energy stored, which was passed from the tomato, of 100 units. Of the 100 units of energy in, 90 units are used to power the worm's daily activities, and much of that energy is lost to the activities and surroundings. So, how much of the original energy is stored now?
10. 10 units is the energy stored and available for the next level, the secondary consumer. A Carolina wren is flying up above and makes a tasty meal out of the hornworm. The wren will serve here as our secondary consumer. This wren receives the 10 units of stored energy from the hornworm. Of the 10 units of energy in, 9 units are used to power the wren's daily activities, and much of that energy is lost to the activities and surroundings. How much of the original energy is stored?
I'm going to have to say 1. 1 unit is stored and available for the next level, which is the tertiary consumer.
A red-tailed hawk is circling the field and sees the wren flying below. It swoops down to catch his meal. Getting the 1 unit of stored energy as he eats it. So in conclusion, only 10% of energy is passed on to each trophic level.
And the other 90% is used in cellular activities or lost as heat to the environment. And don't forget, organisms release waste and die. Decomposers take over and return nutrients to the earth.
Okay, I have a thinking question. If a tertiary consumer died, how much energy would be left for the decomposers?
Well, decomposers would still only receive 10% of a tertiary consumer's energy. So 10% of 1 unit is 0.1%. Only 0.1% will be left or available for the decomposers.
Now let's talk about relationships. First, let's discuss these factors that are not relationships: competition, predator, or predation, and prey. Competition is to fight for a resource. Competition is a struggle between organisms to survive as they attempt to use or fight for the same limited resources. Competition can occur within the same species or among other species.
Before we discuss predation, remember a predator is an organism that hunts. Predation is an interaction where one organism, the predator, kills another organism, the prey, for food.
A limiting factor is an environmental condition or resource that limits the size of a population of organisms. Limiting factors include competition for food, water, and mates.
It may even include space and shelter. Now on to relationships. Symbiosis is a close relationship created between 2 species due to coevolution, species that evolve together in their environment. The relationship must benefit at least one of the species. So keep that in mind as we discuss the 3 relationships now.
When we talk actual relationships, there are just 3. So predation and competition are not relationships. The first one, my favorite one, is mutualism.
Whoop whoop! That's code word number 3. Make sure you spell the word correctly and include the timestamp.
Mutualism is what we call a plus-plus relationship because both species benefit. Here are a few examples of mutualism. You may have seen this first example if you have ever watched Finding Nemo, a clownfish and sea anemone. The clownfish is the only type of fish that can live within a sea anemone and not get stung from its tentacles. So the sea anemone provides the clownfish with protection, but also its leftover food. The sea anemone benefits because it gets better water circulation when the clownfish swims. Next, we have a buffalo and a tick bird. The tick bird eats ticks off of the buffalo, so the buffalo gets free tick removal and the tick bird gets free food. Last, we have a bumblebee and flowers. Bumblebees help pollinate flowers, which allows more flowers to grow. In return, bumblebees are provided with the food source from the flower's pollen.
Commensalism is a second relationship. Commensalism is what we call a +0. A plus because one species benefits, and the 0, which means the other species is unaffected, not harmed nor helped. One example we have is Spanish moss and trees. Spanish moss, it lives on trees, and the moss has to live on the tree because it cannot make its own food. So the Spanish moss receives food and nutrients from this relationship, and the tree is unaffected. Another example is a shark and a remora fish. Because the small remora fish can receive food in the form of scraps from the shark, as well as protection from predators. The shark is unbothered or unaffected by the presence of the remora fish. And lastly, an elephant and an egret. An egret is similar to an oxpecker, which is a type of bird. The elephant grazes for food, and by walking in the grassland, stirs up insects. And the egrets, which hang around the elephants, get those insects for food. And remember, this is also commensalism because the egret is getting food and the elephant is unaffected.
And lastly, parasitism is our last relationship. Parasitism is where one species benefits and another is harmed. So we say that this is a plus-minus relationship. We call the organism that benefits the parasite, and the organism that is harmed the host. A parasite cannot live without a host, though, so keep that in mind. The first example is a tick and mammals. Mammals are important tick hosts. So, for example, when a dog dies, then the ticks either need to find another host or they die. The second example is the cuckoo bird and a bird's nest. Cuckoo birds are an obligate brood parasite. They lay its eggs in nests of other birds. Then, at the right time, the hen cuckoo flies down to the host's nest and pushes one egg out of the nest, lays an egg, and flies off. The third example are mosquitoes and mammals. So mosquitoes need to suck the blood from animals in order to lay its eggs. Without the blood, the eggs would die and no more mosquitoes could be born. Fun fact, it's only the female mosquitoes that bite you.
Extra credit opportunity. You have two options here, but of course, you're welcome to do both. There will be a Google Doc titled Extra Credit in this week's assignment directions. For option 1, you're going to research symbiotic relationships, not the ones we previously discussed. You may want to pause here and take a screenshot, but also know that these will be on your Google Doc and your assignment for this week. So for option 1, you are to pick 2 of these relationships to research.
So here's an example of what extra credit option 1 will look like. Remember, you cannot use this example or one from the video. So it's going to ask you what organisms are involved, a brief description of the relationship, that's the part that you have to research, and then you have to tell what the symbiotic relationship is. So it would either be parasitism, mutualism, or commensalism.
Also in the document for extra credit, you will find option 2, which is watch the movie Finding Nemo and answer the questions that go along with it.
Well, kids, that wraps things up for episode 2 of the Bio-Besties. It's been real, it's been fun. It's been real fun. Hopefully you have all of the code words written down along with a timestamp. Double check your spelling on those code words also. Make sure you take advantage of the extra credit opportunities, whether it be the first option, the second option, or even both. Until next time, kiddos, bye!
Bye.
Bye.